Hello, and thank you for being here. I'm Beth Pike, Communications Director at the State Historical Society of Missouri. And this year marks the 125th anniversary of the founding of the State Historical Society. As part of our year-long celebration, we've been showcasing a variety of collections at our 6 research centers across the state. Science Fiction Fandom in Missouri is one of our unique collections, which you will soon hear about from my colleague, AJ Medlock. Also, if you are a member of the State Historical Society of Missouri, thank you for supporting us. Your annual membership helps us continue programs like we have for you today. And if you're not a member or it's time to renew, we invite you to join our society online at shsmo.org. Now let's get started. A.J. Medlock coordinates our St. Louis Research Center on the campus of the University of Missouri, St. Louis. A.J. grew up in St. Louis and received a master's degree in library and information science from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a Master of Arts in Public History from Southeast Missouri State University. Also a lifelong Trekkie, as he and I have discussed over the years. Please join us in welcoming A.J. Medlock.
Okay, well, thank you for attending today's lecture, History on Elm Lecture, Science Fiction Fandom in Missouri. So I bet many of you are in the audience are wondering why SHSMO agreed to host this lecture. Why are we interested in preserving science fiction fandom's history in Missouri? So depending on whom you ask, I'm to blame. So you see, I'm a lifelong trekker. Since the age of 6, I've watched all the shows. I've read all the book tie-ins. I've collected Trek-related comic books and toys. Even paid money to meet the legendary William Shatner. I'm even a commissioned officer aboard the USS Umiak, a chapter of Starfleet International, one of the world's largest fan organizations. When one of my crewmates, Tim Johns, announced to the crew on Facebook that he was looking for a home for the records of his former Starfleet International chapter, the USS Discovery, I knew I wanted to acquire the records for SHSMO. So after months of speaking with Tim, some could even accuse me of pestering him, he invited me to his home in March 2022 to examine the records. And what I discovered was an archivist paradise. Over 4 boxes of meeting minutes, correspondence, chapter reports, rosters, newsletters, and zines created by the group and others like it. And so what these records revealed was that Missouri, especially St. Louis, has a deep-rooted science fiction fandom culture stretching back to the 1930s. And for those of you who are wondering, the person featured on this slide is the one and only Wil Wheaton, who portrayed Wesley Crusher in Star Trek: The Next Generation. This photograph was the first item I pulled from the box when I examined the collection, based on my discussions with former Discovery members. This picture was taken during one of Wheaton's appearances at a local Star Trek convention in St. Louis in the early 1990s. So all the materials from the USS Discovery Records are interesting. SHSMO is not going to allow me to pursue science fiction fandom collections based solely on my love of Star Trek, no matter how intense it may be. So we're back to our initial question, why fandom? Let's begin by defining fandom. The following definition, in my view, sums up fandom quite well. It is a modern subculture in which individuals deeply connect with a literary work, celebrity, or media franchise and express their attachment through style, creativity, and a shared sense of community. So based on this definition, there are many fandoms, ranging from movies to sports, even Elvis impersonators. So in this slide, I have pulled some fun examples of science fiction fandom culture from our collections. So the first 2 images are from the Dan McGinnis papers. Dan organized several Star Trek and general science fiction fandom conventions in the St. Louis area in the late 1980s and early 1990s. These images depict cosplayers at Epsilon Alpha, a Star Trek convention held in 1993 in Collinsville, Illinois, located in the St. Louis metropolitan area. So the term cosplay is shorthand for costume play. It refers to individuals who dress up as a specific character from a book or media franchise. So on this slide, we see an attendee dressed as a Ferengi, an alien species from Star Trek, and a couple dressed as characters from the play Cats, I believe. So I knew that Cats was a popular stage play, but I never realized that it was so popular that people who attended science fiction and pop culture conventions dressed up as characters from the play. And the last image is of an unidentified male wielding a lightsaber at Archon, one of the oldest science fiction conventions in the St. Louis area. What makes this image especially interesting is that it was taken at the first Archon in 1977, shortly after the release of the original Star Wars film opened in theaters. So considering that this picture was shot in an era before the internet, it's a testament to the creativity of whoever created this lightsaber and their dedication. I imagine they must have watched the film in theaters multiple times to accurately replicate this lightsaber to the best of their ability. So over the last few years, fandom studies have emerged as a field of study in academia. These scholars seek to explore how fandom communities consume text and create social structures based on the preferred media franchise, which includes sports, movies, and even science fiction fandom. And during my research, I also came across a quote that kind of encapsulates what I'm trying to convey to you. So as a quote, modern life moves through mediated spaces, and everyone has something to which they find themselves reacting with emotional engagement: a favorite show or book, news, politics, sports, a theoretical approach, a faith. We as a society are looking for something to which we can emotionally relate, something to which we can bond, others with whom we can form connections, whether the basis is a cause or a public or a community. By giving us a concrete object of study, then, fandom offers us a window into the mediated world at the heart of our social, political, and cultural identities. So, since that faithful meeting with Tim Johns, I've made it my mission to collect and preserve this history at SHSMO. This presentation will chronicle science fiction fandom's history and evolution in the state, showcase some highlights from the collections, and leave you, the audience, with a mandate to help us preserve this history at SHSMO. So join me as we go back in time to the 1920s, when science fiction fandom as we know it began to gestate in the popular culture. So, as I mentioned before, so science fiction fandom as we know it today originated from the publication of 4 science fiction magazines: Weird Tales, Amazing Stories, Science Wonder Stories, and Air Wonder Stories, published between the 1920s and the 1930s. Although the genre predated these publications, what was unique about these magazines was the voluminous correspondence between readers and editors, leading to clubs celebrating these publications. So, for example, fans of Wonder Stories formed the St. Louis Science Fiction League in St. Louis in 1934. Although the group disbanded in 1936, St. Louisans revitalized the club in 1955, rechristening it as the St. Louis Science Fiction Society. Although the St. Louis Science Fiction Fantasy Society was not a large group, it produced 2 zines, including Fan 2CE. One of its members, Thomas Scortia, would go on to write The Glass Inferno, which Hollywood adapted into the film The Towering Inferno in 1974. Unfortunately, I have not found any original hard copies of these zines or related textual materials from these early Missouri groups. Sometimes I wish I had been active in this field decades ago, because I would have loved to have met these early fans and preserved their archives. So as these science fiction clubs germinated throughout the United States, they provided the impetus for science fiction conventions to flourish. Now, please do me a favor and take whatever popular notions that you may have of science fiction conventions and throw them out the window. These early conventions only had a smattering of cosplayers, did not host merchants hawking toys and knickknacks, and featured 0 global celebrity stars like Stan Lee, may he rest in peace. These were less glitzy affairs where science fiction aficionados gathered to watch science fiction films, give speeches, and discuss the genre with their favorite authors like Isaac Asimov before he was the Isaac Asimov. Some early conventions included the World Science Fiction Convention, hosted in Caravan Hall in New York City from July 2nd to 4th, 1939. Later rebranded as the World Science Fiction Convention, this convention is now held annually in the United States and throughout the world, and eventually made its way to St. Louis in 1969. By courtesy of the Ozark Science Fiction Association, whom I will now refer to as OSFA for the remainder of this presentation. Founded in July 1965 in Crystal City, Missouri, early OSFA members included St. Louisans Rich Wannon and Joyce Fisher, and Dave and James Hall of Crystal City, Missouri. Initially, OSFA members typically met at one another's homes. As the club grew, they met at larger venues, including the St. Louis Museum of Natural History. The typical meeting consisted of club business, followed by discussions about science fiction literature. Members traded science fiction magazines and zines, played games like Dungeons and Dragons, and watched movies using a film projector. OSFA also published several zines. One of them was Surish, a members-only publication, and OSFAN, its zine for the general public. So it'll probably be helpful if I explain what I mean when I say zine. A zine is a fanzine is a self-published underground publication featuring stories, artwork, and poetry focusing on a specific media franchise or literary work. An excellent example of OSFA zines include Surish number 4, published between 1966 and 1969. I haven't been able to lock down the exact date yet. So this issue consists of short stories like Incident Beside the Gaffia Tree by William L. Bowers, and some poetry such as Lucifer by Harold Steele. So for those of you who are unable to decipher the text, it reads, "When from the night a star is from its orbit torn and hurled by some gigantic force precipitously towards its destruction, what does it think? I wonder if it prays with sniveling bleats for mercy that this monstrous thing be not allowed to happen. Perhaps it rages with shrieks and inarticulate mouthings, crushing the mindless, senseless idiot god, who would so wantonly destroy its beauty. Maybe it does not know or care what lies before it, but gives thanks with fervent ejaculations to its deity for being singled out from all the rest to have this honor, this most joyous flight. And then again, it may with philosophic calm drop quietly, silently towards its destiny, and falling, murmurs softly to itself, this is fate." So also included in this issue are 2 reviews of Star Trek characters, Lieutenant Uhura and Commander Spock, and the actors who portrayed them. These reviews are written when Star Trek was a new television program. And yes, I will make several more references to Star Trek in this presentation because I cannot help myself. Another component of zines were artwork. They're one of the more exciting aspects of these. One of the more exciting aspects of these science fiction fandom collections is all the artwork produced for the fanzines, flyers, convention programs, and posters. Some of these artists, such as Mike McFadden, whose work I will showcase later in this presentation, went on to have successful professional careers. Remember, zines like Sirius existed in the pre-internet era, so they had to produce zines through analog methods. One form was a mimeograph, which was a duplication machine that forces ink through stencil onto paper. So while these zines may seem outdated to the modern eye, they were an important training ground for writers and artists. So one of my favorite examples of a zine is the Green Vomit. Now I know the title and artwork do not sound appealing, but bear with me. So published around the same time as Sirius and Osfan, the Green Vomit tells the story of Melvin Grew, a scientist who suffers a chemical accident. allowing him to incapacitate his enemies by vomiting on them. And as a side note, I hope that none of you ate before this presentation. If you did, I sincerely apologize. His arch nemesis is the Odor, a former Army demolitions expert who suffers from a similar chemical accident, only to be cursed with terrible body odor. Bitter about his affliction, the Odor determines to wreak havoc on society, vowing to make everyone on the planet smell as bad as him. The two engage in a fierce battle over the fate of the future, only to have the city's citizens chase both hero and supervillain out of town, claiming that both are too stinky to live in decent society. So one of the most intriguing aspects of the zine is not as content necessarily, although as you can see on the slides, it's actually very it is kind of interesting. As you see in one slide, the green vomit is trying to puke on the Odor, but the Odor repels them with his armpit odor. It's kind of humorous, but once again, it's not necessarily the content of the green vomit that's so interesting, but its author, the one and only Bob Gale, a University City native and film writer. He wrote the zine while attending high school in the late 1960s. So this zine represents Gale's early forays into writing, allowing scholars to chronicle the development of his early writing style to his later, more mature works, including the Back to the Future films, which Gale co-wrote and produced. I've only begun to skim the surface regarding zines published in St. Louis and Missouri in the 1960s and 70s. According to my research, there were countless zines produced in this era. Some of them include Mathem, a Tolkien magazine, and I believe Kaliki, I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, which was dedicated to the works of James Branch Campbell, to name a few. So by the late 1960s, science fiction fandom flourished, leading OSFA to host its regional science fiction convention, Ozark in 1966, 1967, and 1968. The convention grew in popularity, spurring OSFA to place a bid before the World Science Fiction Society to host the 27th World Science Fiction Convention in St. Louis, Missouri, which they won. Held at the Chase Park Plaza Hotel from August 28th to September 1st, 1969, the event resembled a more modern science fiction and more modern science fiction conventions and pop culture conventions. The convention included a panel discussion about the recent moon landing, speeches by noted authors Robert Silverberg, Ben Bova, and Harlan Ellison, and a masquerade ball, and even a pool party. On this slide, we have several photographs of the convention taken by attendee J.K. Klein. The first photographs feature Star Trek cosplayers. Once again, I cannot help myself. And the second features a large panel discussion. The third depicts that year's Toastmaster, noted author Harlan Ellison. And the fourth is an image of Lee Couch, one of OSFA's dedicated members who served as the convention committee's secretary. Now, before any of you get excited, I must sadly inform you that these images, unfortunately, do not belong to SHSMO. Instead, they are part of the J.K. Klein Photographs and Papers on Science Fiction Fandom at the University of California, Riverside. Unfortunately, I have very little documentation about the St. Louis Worldcon or OSFA beyond the club's zines and a program book for the convention. Now, that being said, if any of you, by some miracle, have original photographs or other materials related to the St. Louis Worldcon or OSFA, I am interested in speaking with you after this talk. So, based on the available documentation that we have at SHSMO, OSFA disbanded sometime after 1972, the last year they printed OSFAN, their public zine. According to Don Brazier, a former OSFA member, the group's membership gradually transitioned from science fiction to other topics. However, the St. Louis Science Fiction Society, which I will refer to as SLSFS for the remainder of this presentation, emerged in the 1970s to fill the void left by OSFA. So founded in 1972, The group met in Wilson Hall at Washington University. The club was initially known as Federation 2 and dedicated to Star Trek fandom. However, its members broadened their horizons by 1975 to include all forms of science fiction fandom, leading members to rename the group the St. Louis Science Fiction Society. Like OSFA, the club quickly grew, amassing nearly 40 members by 1976. Like most science fiction clubs, members frequently met to discuss science fiction and published a zine, The Outsider. What makes SLSFS so influential is that they were responsible for establishing Archon, one of the oldest science fiction conventions in Missouri. According to Barbara Fitzsimmons, one of SLSFS's early members and Archon's first co-chair, the impetus for the convention began during one of the club's meetings in November 1976, when Fitzsimmons and other members discussed how much they enjoyed attending Icon, a science fiction convention held in Iowa. After some discussion, Fitzsimmons and her colleagues decided to organize a science fiction convention in St. Louis. Their primary goal was to unite St. Louis's various science fiction interests at one convention. SLSFS spent the next several months organizing the convention, inviting celebrity guests, selecting the convention's official site, which was Stauffer's Riverfront Tower, and choosing an official name. According to Fitzsimmons, Archon is, and I quote, a play on words, as the arch is a landmark of the city, and because the convention was Archon, end quote. So despite SLSFS's inexperience, the first Archon was a modest success, luring 287 attendees over the last 3 days. Some notable events included readings, panel discussions, a masquerade ball, and a Toastmaster that closed out the event, all which have become Archon staples. So among the first celebrity guests of honor was none other than George R.R. Martin. And that's the man himself on the screen. This image comes from the Amy Newell Verseman Papers. So Amy was one of the early Archon participants and graciously donated the scrapbook from the first Archon to SHSMO. Now, please remember this photograph was taken at the beginning of Martin's career, long before he wrote Game of Thrones. And the second image is of Ray Bradbury at Archon in the year 2000. So this photograph comes from the Sam Maroney Papers. Sam was a photographer for Starlog, a science fiction magazine, and he plans on donating all sorts of pictures documenting science fiction fandom in St. Louis and Missouri later this year. So, since its inception in 1977, Archon has become an institution, growing to encompass all sorts of fandom, including anime. Over the years, Archon has also attracted prominent celebrity guests, including George Takei, author Glenn Cook, and Stephen King, who appeared at Archon 6. Now, the poster I featured on this slide is an advertisement for King's appearance at Archon 6. Now, of all the acquisitions that we've made involving science fiction fandom, this is one of my favorite acquisitions and the most popular among our patrons. Local artist Mike McFadden and Dan Patterson created this poster. So, as I mentioned before, Amy Newell Verseman, she donated this poster too. When she revealed it to me, she asked, so would you have any use for something like this? And of course, I tried to play it cool because I had been looking for a copy of this poster or original of this poster for several months. And I responded, I tried to play it cool. I said, I think we would like this poster. And of course, Amy was no fool. And she understood I was trying to be kind of calm about the whole thing. Nonetheless, I'm very, very happy that she agreed to donate this poster to us. So as I mentioned before, people like McFadden and the aforementioned Bob Gale use these local zines, flyers, and of course, posters like you see on the slide to hone their craft as they prepare themselves for professional careers. Other authors like St. Louis and Glenn Cook frequently visited Archon for readings, testing their newest works before audiences. Now, before I move on, I want to share some other interesting items related to Archon from the Amy Newell Verseman Papers. The first image on the slide is a signed letter from Stephen King. It's a standard letter. King merely lets Barbara Miller, an Archon official, know that he and Tabby, his wife, will be happy to attend Archon. Despite its mundane nature, I couldn't help but share it with you all because, it's Stephen King. It's really kind of cool. We have an original Stephen King letter. The second letter is from Robert Bloch, a famous science fiction / horror novelist. So in the letter, Mr. Bloch is writing to Donna Sutton, one of another Archon organizer. In one passage, he writes, and I quote, "Anyhow, I was glad to hear from you on any day and want to thank you for the kind words and kind invitation to Archon, presumably," end quote. So what I find so humorous about this letter is that Robert Bloch, as I'm sure most of you know, wrote the novel Psycho, which famed film director Alfred Hitchcock adapted into a film starring Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh. So, here we have essentially the creator of the slasher genre, essentially being a sweet, kind old man to one of Archon's organizers. When I saw this letter in the Newell Versemans, I kind of couldn't help but chuckle to myself. Now, when Amy included these letters and others in the donation, she informed me that she would smack me if she ever found them for sale on eBay. I assured her that would not be the case, and I have kept my promise. So another aspect of Archon another aspect of science fiction fandom for our collections, I'm going to talk a little bit about the U.S. Discovery, which provided the impetus for SHSMO to begin collecting and documenting science fiction fandom in Missouri. So the USS Discovery's roots are in Lufkin, Texas, where trekkers led by John Bradbury established the USS Enterprise in October 1973. Interest in the group exploded in Texas, leading the USS Enterprise's leadership to found Starfleet International as an umbrella organization for Star Trek clubs on May 6, 1974. Longtime trekker and St. Louisan Douglas Glenn joined Starfleet International in 1984, but quickly learned that no Starfleet chapters existed in Missouri. He subsequently founded the USS Discovery in 1984 as a chapter of Starfleet International. Glenn selected the name Discovery because, and I quote, "the very word conjures thoughts of exploration and going where no man has gone before," end quote. So in this slide, I've included the USS Discovery's original logo. What's interesting about this collection is how the Discovery's members merged their regional identity with their fandom. So as you can see, they took the Starfleet insignia design from the movies and incorporated it into the Gateway Arch. For the group, the Gateway Arch symbolized the public that the USS Discovery was a community-oriented group. From the beginning, the Discovery focused on promoting the ideals of Star Trek, serving as a conduit for trekkers to meet and bond over their mutual interest in the series and science fiction. So over the USS Discovery's 30-plus year history, its members participated in highway cleanups, raised funds for the March of Dimes, and volunteered for Jerry Lewis telethons. They were incredibly committed to community service. I like to think of clubs like the Discovery as a Rotary or Kiwanis club for nerds. They perform their good acts through their love of science fiction or preferred media franchise like today's Star Wars, today's 501st Legion, which is a Star Wars fandom. And of course, I'm not using nerds pejoratively. I'm using it very positively in this context. Obviously, I'm a nerd myself. So another example of the USS Discovery's commitment to community service is one of its early members, Dr. David Miller. Dr. Dave joined the Discovery after graduating from Mizzou's School of Medicine. While aboard the USS Discovery, Dr. Dave combined his love of family medicine and Star Trek to promote public health. One of his endeavors was Sickbay, the quarterly journal of Starfleet medicine. Sickbay focused on providing accurate health information and advice to Starfleet International members. So, for example, Dr. Dave published articles on the AIDS epidemic that displayed compassion for the LGBTQ plus community, noting that it was not strictly a gay disease. In addition, he reminded his readers that LGBTQ plus individuals were the least likely to contract the virus by the early 1990s due to continued lifestyle changes. So remember, Dr. Dave published these articles in this newsletter in the early 1990s, when there was still much medical, there was a lot of medical misinformation circulating in the United States, including claims that AIDS was a gay disease. Dr. Dave would go on to form the Starfleet Medical Corps in 1992, serving as his first director. And of course, I picked up a slide. On the slide, you'll see an issue from Sickbay, the Quarterly Journal of Starfleet Medicine. And it's basically one of his larger articles about the AIDS epidemic in the state. And actually, he also gave talks at a lot of Starfleet meetings in Missouri about AIDS, trying to once again spread public and accurate public health information about the AIDS epidemic. So, after the Discovery's founding, Starfleet International chapters flourished in Missouri, and most held the same spirit of community service. One of SHSMO's most recent fandom acquisitions is the Dan McGinnis Papers. Dan was the captain of the USS Hexham, a Starfleet International chapter based in Belleville, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis, and eventually served as commander of Starfleet International in the mid-1990s. And so the first photograph we have is of Dan McGinnis in his Starfleet uniform. That was taken at Epsilon Alpha, a Star Trek convention he organized. He's standing next to Robin Lynch of the USS Sally Ride, based in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. So Epsilon Alpha was a Star Trek convention that Dan McGinnis organized and was held in Collinsville, Illinois, from September 24th to 26th, 1993. Some celebrity guests included John Haynes Newton, who played Superboy in the late 1980s, and Ike Eisenman, best known for playing Scotty's doomed nephew, Peter Preston, in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. So in the same spirit of community service as Dr. Dave and the USS Discovery, the convention raised funds for pediatric AIDS research at St. Louis Children's Hospital. During the convention, Dan also organized a visit to the St. Louis Children's Hospital to show the convention's celebrity guests what the convention's proceeds would fund. So the second image on the slide features the celebrity guests talking with one of the pediatric AIDS unit's researchers. Mr. Eisenman is standing second from the left. Another guest featured in the image, who's staying next to Mr. Eisenman, is Todd Bryant, who played Captain Claw in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. However, I'm sure my fellow Star Trek fans in the audience would probably prefer to forget that film. We also have a fun image in the collection of a Cleon cosplayer standing next to some of the patients. Obviously, the kids seem really happy to have visitors, but you can kind of tell that they have no idea what to make of this grown man dressed up as a Cleon standing next to them. And of course, in the last image is a photograph of Mr. Eisenman. He's interacting with some of the patients at St. Louis Children's Hospital. So yeah, there's the Dan McGinnis Papers has a ton of photographs from this convention. And it's also going to later on donate some photographs from the convention he held in 1989 called Galactic Trek Fest. It was kind of a merger of Battlestar Galactica and Star Trek fandom. So that's going to be really cool. Hopefully we'll get that later this year. This is another cool representation of science fiction fandom. And that also, incidentally, also features Mr. Eisenman, who was also a guest at that convention. So in the time I've gone over a lot of interesting content, but I want to impress upon you the fact that these collections represent more than a cool conglomeration of pictures and ephemera collected by science fiction fans, even though it's really cool to look at. So let's think back to some of our earlier slides. We saw with the USS Discovery Records that Star Trek fans came together to share their mutual love of Star Trek. However, they did something more important than merely meeting and watching Star Trek and sharing trivia. Rather, they formed a broader sense of community, merging their Trek and regional identities to bring about Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future, or to put it in a different light, their interpretation of Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future. They are taking a popular media franchise and adapting it for their own use. And we've seen through Dr. Dave's efforts to disseminate accurate medical information about AIDS through sickbay and Epsilon Alpha's fundraising efforts for pediatric AIDS research. And we've seen the sense of community in other parts of the presentation, from the St. Louis Science Fiction League and OSFA's early attempts to create a shared community through zines and small conventions, to Archon's efforts to unite St. Louis's disparate science fiction fandoms. Admittedly, I've only touched the surface regarding the possibilities for research in these collections. So, let's face it, fandom is a critical part of American life. In some way, we all consume, create, and identify with popular culture. Understanding how this phenomena has affected and transformed American life is a critical area of study. So our time is kind of slowly, coming to an end. As I mentioned before, we've only scratched the surface of regarding what's out there regarding manuscripts documenting the history of fandom. So right now, most of our success has been happening in the St. Louis area. But thankfully, my colleagues fully support this endeavor and have agreed to make it one of SHSMO's collecting initiatives. So for the next 5 years, from 2023 to 2028, all 6 research centers will actively seek out and acquire fandom-related collections, including science fiction fandom. At the moment, we are primarily interested in collecting early fandom from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So in this slide, you'll see what the other SHSMO research centers hope to collect. Of course, Springfield and Rolla are also interested, but Kansas City, Cape Girardeau, and Columbia are the other major hubs of the fandom activity in Missouri. So, for example, of Kansas City, there's the Kansas City Science Fiction Society, Starbase Kansas City, Delicon, which is a convention, Mid-Americon 1 and 2, and TrekCon. There's also zines we're interested in collecting, like Tribbles or People 2, Interstat, and Homecoming. With Cape Girardeau, there's a lot of clubs and conventions in that area, which I was unaware of, and I have family who live in Cape Girardeau. So, for example, we'd be interested in collecting records from the USS Sally Ride. There's also a local Star Trek convention, our general science fiction convention in the Cape Girardeau area for several years, which was called Continuum. And then in Columbia, several clubs and conventions. There's Concentric, and there's also local Starfleet International chapters, such as the USS Missouri and the USS Horizon. And of course, there's also a zine published in the Columbia area called Batmania. And I'm sure there's much, much more. This is only what I've been able to find recently in my research as I'm trying to help my colleagues acquire these materials. So while I'm aware that groups like fanac.org have digitized numerous fandom-related materials pertaining to that were created in Missouri, SHSMO is interested in only collecting the original, authentic material produced during this era. So while digitization is a valuable tool, it's a form of access, not preservation. So I hope this presentation spurs you to contact friends or family who might have saved materials documenting this history in St. Louis and other parts of the state. Or maybe you yourself have kept old correspondence, photographs, scrapbooks, zines, newsletters, and audiovisual materials documenting this history from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. If so, please consider donating these materials to SHSMO. This history matters, and my colleagues and I are looking forward to preserving it for future generations. So before I open up the floor to questions, I see we already have 6 in the Q&A. I want to thank the donors who graciously gifted their collections to SHSMO. We couldn't do our jobs without the community's support. So I'm forever grateful to people like Tim Johns, who's featured in the first photograph. As I mentioned before, Tim was our first official donor. He donated the USS Discovery Records. I probably pestered Tim for about, I'd say, a year. As you can see, probably the look he's giving me in the photograph is probably the look he gave whenever he saw a text from me bugging him about the USS Discovery Records. But thankfully, Tim was a good sport and eventually donated those materials to us. I also want to thank Chuck and Pam Zorens, obviously Dan McGinnis. I contacted Dan out of the blue on Facebook after going through old star logs and discovering that he had organized the Galactic Trek Fest and Epsilon Alpha. And of course, he was kind of, wondering, well, who's this random nerd who's contacting me about my archives? But eventually, as we got to know one another, and he got to trust me, and we eventually connected, and he donated his papers, and we're really grateful. As you can see from the past slides, lots of great content. So I'm very, very thankful to Dan and his friendship. Alex Tuckelveli, Tara Brazel, Kevin Carroll, Anna Muma, Sam Maroney, Walt Stumper. Walt donated a lot. The Walt Stumper Papers has a lot of great content, a lot of rare zines for other publications. I really didn't even get to mention in this presentation, like Graphan and other great local publications. And of course, Walt Jasek and Don Seacrease, they're featured with me in the bottom slide. They're both local comic book artists and writers and zine writers. They really they donated a lot of their zines, and they were responsible for donating the Green Vomit, which you saw in this presentation. And of course, in the middle slide up here, that's Walter Stumper. And then we have Chuck Zorens, who is dressed up as Scotty from Star Trek. So I thanks to everyone who so far has helped make this collecting initiative a success. And then last but not least, I want to thank, my biggest thanks goes out to Amy Newell Verseman. As I mentioned before, sometimes the only way I can get a hold of people is through Facebook. I'm sure that people don't know what to make of me when I initially contact them. It's not every day that some crazy archivist contacts you about your archives. And for the record, I have been referred to as a crazy archivist. But Amy never hesitated and donated her archives, some of which you have seen in this presentation, including our rare Archon 6 poster. Unfortunately, Amy passed away on February 22nd, 2023. I wish I could have gotten to know her better, but I am very grateful that I got to meet her. I can't say enough kind things about her. I wish she could have been here to see this presentation. But unfortunately, that did not happen. This presentation is dedicated to Amy's memory. I thank her very much. So thank you for attending this presentation. The last slide are my two pets, Benjamin and Steve. They're wearing Star Trek scarves, and my wife got them for my birthday. We're a Star Trek household. What can I say? So we have some time left for questions. So I'll open the floor up to questions from the audience.
Terrific, AJ. I know everybody's enjoyed it, and perfect slide to end your presentation on. Those are very well-loved pups at your house. Tim Johns, I know you gave him a shout out. He appreciated that earlier. By the way, Tim, hope your surgery went well today. He asked, though, are there any major collections that you are aiming to collect?
Yeah, so there is a CIA, Celestial Intervention Agency. It's a Doctor Who group. I've been in contact with them for about a year now. We're just in talks of seeing what they want to donate. So that's kind of on my radar. Also, there's a local Star Trek convention that was hosted in St. Louis in the 1980s. Like I said, my free time, I just go through old Star logs to see what was going on in Missouri and St. Louis in the 80s and 90s and 70s regarding fandom. So I found a local Star Trek convention that occurred during that time from like, I think 82 to 88. So I've had contacted the organizer, and we're still kind of going back and forth, but those are the two major ones. I know Tolkien was a big, there's a Tolkien Society in St. Louis. So I'd be interested in trying to collect materials related to that. And of course, I'm just trying to connect with longtime fans who are active in Archon throughout the last several decades. We're kind of lacking, and with the exception of the Dan McGinnis papers and of course Amy Newell Verseman, we're really kind of lacking in photographic documentation. So we're really looking for like, original photographs of local conventions, whether that be Archon. I know there's a local Tolkien convention that incidentally Amy Newell Verseman and her husband hosted in the 80s. So anything like that, or like original like reel-to-reels from like the 70s, or even from the St. Louis Worldcon, or like VHS tapes as well. And all those old materials, if you're willing to give the originals, if we're going to donate the originals, we'd be interested in trying to preserve those at SHSMO. So that's what's really on the horizon right now.
AG, do you collect any newspaper articles if someone has saved some and would want to donate, or newspaper articles not something you'd necessarily want?
Not typically, unless it's part of a larger collection. Like for example, Amy Newell Verseman with the Archon, she donated the Archon scrapbooks, and there's newspapers in the scrapbooks. But it's also consists of a lot of original, like, flyers and photographs. So if it's a part of something larger, yes, but if it's just newspaper clippings, then no. And that's because, not that we're not grateful when someone thinks of us, but it's just that since we've microfilmed, since SHSMO is the largest repository of Missouri newspapers in the state, and we've microfilmed all that. So it'd just be duplication of effort. But if it's a part of something larger, then yes, I'd be interested.
Outside of St. Louis, a question is roughly how many of these groups have been in Missouri? Have there been? How many of them have there been?
I do not have an accurate count. I know that Kansas City was another hub of fandom activity, and they seem to have a lot, like as I mentioned before, with the Kansas City Science Fiction Association. But yeah, I have not been able to get at there's so many, and not all of them, were that well known or would appear in like Starlog, or and they may have a brief note in someone's zine, but I have not been able to get an accurate count. But it was pretty much all over in Kansas City, even Rolla, Columbia, Joplin, Cape Girardeau, but I haven't really taken an accurate count. Too many to remember.
So Joe Barnes, hey Joe from Moberly, he asks, do you have anything on the USS Horizon?
I wish. I think the Horizon, there was that was a Columbia. I think that's a Columbia. That's a Columbia ship. We have a lot with the good thing about the USS Discovery Records is that they saved zines from all over the United States pertaining to Starfleet International from all these chapters. And we do have a lot of Horizon, original Horizon newsletters and zines. But in terms of official ship records, I believe that Columbia has microfilm copies, but unfortunately we would want the originals. So it'd be interesting if someone still has the original records to if they would be interested in donating the originals. But unfortunately for now, it's just the microfilm and what you can find in the original newsletters that you can find in the USS Discovery Records.
Deborah Griffith asked, will you be conducting a statewide collecting institution survey for other fandom collections, such as like Missouri's S&T, which has a nice pulp sci-fi magazine collection?
In terms of like an institutional survey, not yet. I'm aware of that of that collection, but as I go forward, it'd be a good idea to like look at those other institutions, see what they collected, so there's no duplication of effort. But right now, it's just most of my focus is just kind of like connecting with community members and trying to see what they've saved so far. That's really been the primary effort on my end.
Lauren asked, have you reached out to the Voyage Home Museum in Riverside, Iowa? She said they might be able to send out the word.
I have not. I didn't even think of that. That I didn't. That totally. That's really.
Write it down.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to write that down. Voyage Home Museum. That's because that would because I've had a devil of a time trying to find anyone who saved anything from these old chapters. Because there's so many Starfleet International chapters in, especially in the St. Louis area. And even in Missouri, and it just seems like I cannot find anyone who's saved any of that content. But yeah, I'll check that out. I appreciate that. I will give them I'm writing it down now. But yeah, I will give them a shout out and see if they'd be willing to.
Yeah, great idea. Nora has asked, have you been or are you planning to attend Archon to see if folks have items that they could show you or possibly depart with?
Yeah, I did a presentation there last October, and I got some good leads. I made some connections, but people get busy, and so I haven't heard back from the connections I've made. But people get busy. Archives is not the first on everyone's mind, but I plan on going again because I'm always trying to network and trying to find collections for SHSMO, and I've been kind of going off and on since 2016. So either way, I'm going to try to be there just to have some fun. But yeah, I'll definitely be there to try to see what else I can dig up.
So what's been the challenge of going about what you're doing here with this collection, starting it and continuing it and growing it?
Well, I think because it's not something that people necessarily think is important, or they don't view that as something that historians are going to want to preserve. So so they tend to throw things away, which is unfortunate. Luckily, if someone like Walt Stumper, who Walt saved a lot, and you get lucky and you'll get like a gold mine like of Walt Stumper. Or it's like Sam Maroney, who he donated the first part of his archives, but he's still going through more, especially the photographs. But those are few and far between. I've even connected with like local authors who I've gotten their archives, but they didn't think that local science fiction authors, and even they didn't think that they would be worthy of important enough to preserve. They're just flabbergasted when I contacted them. I think it's also because it's still like viewed in the popular culture as something that's nerdy and weird. Not that it's weird, but it's kind of the perception. But in terms of of interacting with people, it's always been a positive experience. And when someone has saved something, people have always opened their doors to me. So it's not necessarily the people. It's just people just don't think when they're living through it that's necessarily going to be important, and people don't want to deal with clutter. And of course, these organizations, they kind of come and go, and it's not like your traditional like Kiwanis Club where you have an official record keeper. You're kind of just it's sometimes the record keeping organization is not as standardized as you would have a traditional organization.
Now, part of what you do, AJ, though, is you go out, like you said, sometimes it's just overwhelming and like, well, maybe I'll donate it when I can get around organizing it myself. And, but that's a lot what you do. So they don't even have to, it just could be like, hey, right. You go into them and you do all that. So could you walk us through that process?
Usually I just do site visits to someone's, if they want me to in their home, to like look at their stuff to see what they have, provide see what they have, see what's like if what they have is archival value, like as I mentioned before, like old correspondence or old zines, I can okay, that's something you need to keep. But if it's a photocopy of a photocopy, okay, that's not keep that. It can be overwhelming, but usually if either you can just put it all in a couple boxes, I can take it with you, or if you want to do it yourself, I can just provide advice. It varies from person to person, but I frequently go out to across the metro region to pick up materials. For example, I just picked up the Mark W. Tiedemann Papers, a local science fiction author who wrote for the Isaac Asimov robot series. I went out to his house, picked up his archives. He has more that's coming on the way, but I'm always going out on the road. I try to make it as painless as possible, but so you don't have to do too much work or drive out to me, because I know not everyone wants to drive out where I'm based out of Ulmsall. Not everyone wants to have to navigate a university campus. But if you want to come out and visit and donate, that's perfectly fine too.
And during the process, has anything just gobsmacked you when you received it and went through it, like going, wow, this is really, really cool? I know there's so many.
The Amy Newell Verseman Papers, like the Stephen, the all the correspondence, like she said, here's some correspondence, like, okay, she showed me a couple, and then when I got back, and she made the, if I see this on eBay, I'm going to smack you. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm not going to, I don't sell anything. And then I got back, and then I see like the Stephen King stuff, the Robert Bloch, the Robert Silverberg, all these famous authors, and seeing their original handwriting. It was really like, wow, I can't believe we have this. Or like the, that was really, or like the Walt Jasek Papers, when I found the Green Vomit, and I found out who, when he showed me who the author was, I knew Bob Gale was from here, but to have an original Bob Gale zine, like showing his early work, that was another one that I was just, just amazed to see. Another one was from the Dan McGinnis Papers. So he was the head of Starfleet Region 12, and he donated a VHS tape where they were at the Missouri Botanical Garden filming a PSA about their fight against AIDS. So they're out in the Botanical Garden in their Starfleet uniforms, and they're giving, they're just, it's still at a time in the mid 90s, like 1995, where there's still a lot of misconceptions about AIDS, and they're out there doing these this PSA is giving all this information about how they're going to raise funds to for an AIDS cure, and that was another great visual representation of science fiction fandom, the community service element. I was just amazed to see that VHS tape, because I said we have very few photographs and audiovisual materials. So when I saw that, I was kind of tickled to death to see it and have it.
So since this is part of the collection effort that's going on right now, folks can't really come in yet and see the collections, right? I mean, until you get it all processed. Am I right on that, AJ? Or is
you can come in. Usually it takes depending on how big it is and how much other collections I have in the backlog, it may take like a week or a month or two. But I mean, if you bit after that, you can come in and see it in this. Most of the fandom stuff is in the St. Louis Research Center. But I mean, I have a lot of that on site. But you're free to come in, even if I'm still processing. You happen to notice that something popped up on our collections page that you find really neat. I mean, you can obviously come in. I'm always giddy when I get this stuff in, so I'm always like pulling my colleagues in the library, like, hey, come on, look at this. This is really cool. You need to see this.
So they should just contact you. So
yeah, contact me. I'll be happy to show me. I can't let you see all of it. It has to be very curated since I'm still organizing it. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to show you what it is. I mean, but I said we try to be as quick as possible to at least get the preliminary inventory out for the collection and make it available for researchers. And of course, if you don't live in St. Louis, we can have it temporarily couriered over to our other research centers, like in Columbia, Cape Girardeau, Springfield, and Rolla. So there's various avenues where you can see these materials.
Okay, terrific. Well, we are out of time. I know we could talk more on this subject, and maybe you'll pop back in on another virtual talk. Let us know how this collection initiative's going, and keep us informed. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. That wraps up, and we hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.